Persona 4 has been an incredibly popular series for Atlus over the years. After its initial release on the PlayStation 2 in 2008, it's received a remake, multiple sequels, and various adaptations. Out of all the ways that fans imagined their favorite characters interacting on screen, seeing them beat the life bars out of each other probably wasn't what they had in mind. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at one of the most interesting genre crossovers of the early 2010s, Persona 4 Arena. After Persona 4 was released, people on the team were thinking of ways to expand the Persona brand. While they could try to expand their fan base by constantly improving their games, they wanted to attract a new audience, and they didn't think that they could do that by just making RPGs. That's when they came up with the idea of making a fighting game. Several important members of the Persona 4 development team loved fighting games and would play them all the time. Those members included Katsura Hashino, a director and producer, Shigenori Sojima, the art director and character designer, and Kazuhisa Wada, the chief designer. These three individuals would hold similar positions on this new project, with Wada sliding into the director's chair and Hashino focusing on production. While they all had a passion for the genre, they weren't experienced in making them. If they were going to make a Persona fighting game, they wanted to do it right. In an interview with 4Gamer, director Kazuhisa Wada said, "I wanted to make the best fighting game that doesn't end with an easy character game. And if I can't make it, there's no point in doing it. However, we don't have the know-how of fighting games, so we decided to collaborate with excellent outsiders." For Wada, deciding on these excellent outsiders wasn't difficult. At the company Arc System Works, I have always felt sympathy for the attitude of making things. When I read the interview with Toshimichi Mori, the producer of BlazBlue, it was impressive that there were so many parts that I could sympathize with. Of course, it's a company that has one of the best development capabilities in Japan for fighting games, and there was a strong request to work with them. They started laying the groundwork for this collaboration in the middle of 2010, shortly before that year's Persona Music Live, which started on August 6, 2010. And both Katsura Hashino and Toshimichi Mori attended the concert that year. The request that Hashino made was very specific. He didn't just want to work with Arc System Works, he wanted Mori's BlazBlue team. The BlazBlue team isn't just making fighting games, it's a strong stance to create entertainment centered on fighting games. That is why it has been well received by people other than fighting game fans. If you want to move the P4U project, I definitely wanted to work with the BlazBlue team that creates such entertainment. So I asked the BlazBlue team to develop it. At first I was really worried if it would be okay. In my case, it's like the Persona team making a BlazBlue RPG instead of Persona. And if it didn't work, I was planning to store the P4U project away. I was convinced that the power of the BlazBlue team was absolutely necessary to complete P4U. Fortunately for Hashino, the BlazBlue team had wrapped up development on BlazBlue Continuum Ship 2, and his request was granted. The first step was bringing everyone down to Atlus to discuss details. This process was made easier because a large portion of Arc System Works staff was already familiar with Persona. When he first heard of the project, Takumi Ikuchiya, the director of Arc System Works, thought that this was going to just be a small, character-focused project. But he changed his mind when he met with both teams, saw their enthusiasm, and how many of them were Persona fans. Once development on the game began, each team would focus on what they did well. Atlus focused on the game's character designs, music, worldview, scenario creations, and various other aspects of production, while Mori's team handled everything fighting game related. The Persona team got to work on writing the main plot. The original scenario was written by Teppei Kabayashi, and other writers helped to flesh out the story. One of the first things that they did when the two teams got together was determining which of the characters would be included. They decided to include characters from both Persona 3 and 4, but they had to narrow the list down. The BlazBlue team participated in the character selection process as well, submitting a list of their suggestions to Atlus. However, some of their suggestions weren't exactly received well by the Persona team. Two playable characters that they suggested were Nanako and Dojima. One of the pitches was that Nanako would be a playable character, and when she was in trouble, she'd summon Dojima. As you may already be aware, these characters didn't make it into the final game. Mitsuru and Akihiko were two characters that the Persona team thought would translate well into a fighting game, so they were placed on the list fairly quickly. While Shigenori Sojima would serve as the lead character designer for the game, that wouldn't be his only contribution. During the course of the game's production, he was working on the art for a canonical light novel featuring Naoto Shirogane. The story would take place a year after the events of Persona 4 and was written by Natsuki Mamiya. Yuichiro Tanaka was the scenario supervisor for Persona 4 Arena and the upcoming novel, and placed references to events in the novel and the game. The story would not only feature characters and plot elements from Persona 4, but Persona 3 as well. The game was designed to showcase the story from each playable character's point of view. You'd start with a small selection of the Persona 4 cast, and slowly unlock more characters as the story progresses. When writing the story, they would decide on a general theme before writing each character's scenario. There was also a brand new character that would be making her debut, Labrys. One of her most distinguishing features is how she speaks. However, this wasn't in her original character design. In fact, the decision to give her a distinct way of speaking wasn't made until after a voice actress had already been casted. The Persona team wanted her to sound like someone from Kyoto, so she was given a Kansai dialect. According to Gogo Nihon, Kansai dialect is commonly described as a more casual-sounding dialect. There are several differences in pitch, tone, and stress of words when compared with the standard Japanese you learn at language school. While it would end up being a defining characteristic for Labrys, this last-second change caused trouble for those working on the game's audio. Fortunately for them, they had someone from the Kansai area on staff who was able to accurately recreate the dialect. In the English version of the game, while nothing about her background was changed, she was given a Boston accent in order to preserve that aspect of her character.
You were only around till last year. I ain't gonna blame you for not knowing. I'm the new student council president. Nice meeting you.
Speaking of the game's audio, the next challenge that the Persona team encountered was scheduling conflicts with voice talent. This was caused by the large number of Persona-related projects in development. They had to compete for time with the remake of the original game, Persona 4 Golden, and the series' first anime adaptation, Persona 4 The Animation. Fortunately, according to Kazuhisa Wada, the recording sessions went perfectly. A quick aside before we discuss the gameplay. While I played the game, I was more interested in its branching narrative and didn't dive too deeply into its mechanics. In order to learn more about how the game works and to gain a different perspective, I reached out to people who played Persona 4 Arena at a very high level. I was able to get in contact with Lord Knight, who is a finalist at EVO, the largest and most prestigious fighting game tournament in the world, for both BlazBlue and Persona 4 Arena. His experience with both games will help to provide additional context to the story. The BlazBlue team would put their familiarity with 2D fighters to good use. The game was based on what the team had already built in BlazBlue.
They're pretty similar. There's obviously some differences. So a lot of Arc System Works games have a bunch of system mechanics that carry over between every game, essentially. Usually just like protection things to keep certain things from being like broken or not working a certain way. Then from there, they have system stuff that's unique to the game. So all the Arc System Works games feel like a little similar, but then once you dig a little bit deeper, you're like, okay, there's a good amount of variance. So coincidentally, BB and Persona are really similar. So a lot of the strong US players were all BB players. Like I think pretty much every top Persona player except for like Bananacan was a BB player first. Bananacan played BlazBlue after.
It makes sense that the games are similar. They're developed by the same team. This would have given them a solid base to start from in a clear gameplay direction, since there are several things in Persona 4 Arena that are taken directly from BlazBlue.
So at a baseline, right? So the two games shared instant block, right? So that's a mechanic where you can time blocking, like manually blocking by tapping back or tapping down back to gain meter and also reduce your opponent's frame advantage, which is a pretty important mechanic in both games. The movement is pretty similar, like characters can run, backdash, jump, double jump, or jump and air dash. Both games are 4-button games. Both games have systems where like if you block things in the air, you get your air options back. Like I think those are probably like the main. Oh, they both have Galings. They both have save move duration. It's something to prevent infinites, which might sound funny if you played Persona, but they do have. They tried at least anyway. They both have burst as mechanics, so you have combo breaker. I don't think BlazBlue had. Okay, yeah, I don't think BlazBlue has that other thing. But those are like a bunch of mechanics that carry over between the two games, as well as like there's a little bit of character similarity because like every fighting game is gonna have protag and protag's friend and like super mix-up character, grappler character, like things like that.
But even though it was being used as a base, they couldn't just remake BlazBlue. Even though it isn't an RPG, it still has to feel like a Persona game. And the integration of personas led to one of the game's most unique attributes, having to manage 2 characters at once. While they couldn't level up, characters could summon their personas at will to attack their opponents. Of the 4 attack buttons, 2 of them were dedicated solely to your character's persona. The 4 buttons were Light Attack, Heavy Attack, Persona Attack, and Persona Rush. But they don't stay on screen for very long, disappearing as soon as their attacks have concluded. They also aren't invincible. If you summon your persona for an attack, your opponent can hit it, which will make it disappear. And if you're not careful, your persona can break, rendering you unable to summon it for a short period of time. Other elements from Persona 4's battle system were also implemented. It has its own version of an all-out attack, and you can also inflict status ailments. The game's meter is called the SP gauge. Here's how it's described by the Megami Tensei wiki. Like in the series, SP is a resource that can be expended to execute various moves with the relevant input and SP amount. Such commands involve skill boosts, aka EX moves, SP skill attacks, aka supers or super sure killing arts, guard cancels, and one more cancels, aka Roman cancels or rapid cancels, which ends the current attack animation as long as the attack connected. For someone who's just a fan of JRPGs and wants to experience this new entry in the Persona universe, this can seem like an awful lot to contend with. However, this game was designed with both competitive balance and accessibility in mind. While it was based on BlazBlue, it was streamlined to be easier for new players.
So Persona 4 Arena is a pretty accessible, but I mean, it's gonna sound like some lazy dev marketing speak, but the goal of the game is to get new players, specifically not just new players, but people who play RPGs like Persona to play a fighting game. And I think they did a pretty good job with it. So the game is really easy to pick up. It's the first game, anime game that had auto combos. Super controversial when it came out. So that's you can press one button and do a short combo mechanic. So if you played an RPG, you can just hop in and at least be able to do a combo even if you can't do the other stuff. And yeah, that was their whole goal, was just to get new people in, a balance of getting new people in and getting people who like regularly play fighting games to like play this game for a while.
This delicate line that developers walk, trying to appeal to people who aren't typically big fans of fighting games, as well as people who've been playing them their entire lives, isn't easy and is often contentious. As Lord Knight mentioned, the game's auto combos were the subject of a lot of discussion prior to the game's release, but the BlazBlue team had a plan for this mechanic. While it did allow new players to perform a flashy combo with simple inputs, it didn't negatively affect gameplay.
Yeah, so it was stupidly controversial. Like, there was a lot of buzz for this game, of course, when it was announced. And they shared this aspect of the game like pretty early before it was released, and it got so much heat from fighting game players saying it's for scrubs, blah blah blah. But this actually happens in every new game that has auto combos now. So at low level play, you just get to do your 5-hit combo that does like no damage. But at high level play, there's some benefits actually to using the auto combo. So, for example, my Mitsuru, like sometimes the only thing she can do is auto combo to do a combo. Like the way her combos work, she is not guaranteed full combos like other characters. You have to use the auto combo. Also, the auto combo is a way a really creative way actually of putting normals they think would be too good behind like a barrier. So, or giving characters options they wouldn't normally have or might be too strong, and they put it behind the auto combo barrier. It also gives characters way more varied gatlings, because auto combos are usually like 4 or 5 hits, and the game is 4 buttons, so they're able to like, you can cancel out of the auto combo whenever you want, so you can like vary your offense more than if you just had the 4 buttons. It ended up being fine at high level. Like for the most part, other characters don't really use their auto combo, and you see Mitsuru use hers all the time. But yeah, it ended up being fine, and like it wasn't stupid. It didn't make it so that people who don't play fighting games at all could be people who practice really hard, like people were saying, as usual. People always over exaggerate.
While the two teams were each working on their own parts of the game, at some point or another, they would have to integrate the parts together. Naturally, there were some challenges. One of the biggest issues was the background art for the game's stages. There was a disconnect between the visions of the two teams, which led to some confusion. This came down to a different way of approaching the same issue. The BlazBlue team, with their experience making fighting games, approached background design by focusing on fight the characters on the stage, while the Persona team wanted to showcase the characters fighting in a place that looked like a part of everyday life. The BlazBlue team wanted objects to stand out, to be easily identifiable at a glance, but that clashed with the Persona team's desire to have the stages represent the real and often mundane world. After multiple meetings with the Persona team at Atlus, Toshimichi Mori realized he wanted them to bridge the gap between everyday and extraordinary. While it took them twice as long as they originally intended to, they eventually were able to work out this issue. According to Mori, the stage that makes this gap the easiest to understand is the school gate stage. It looks normal at first, but as the fight unfolds, things begin to change. In 2011, Persona 4 Arena, or Persona 4 The Ultimate in Mayonaka Arena in Japan, was first announced in an August issue of Famitsu magazine, while Persona 4 Golden, a remake of the original game, was also announced. This new 2D fighting game was a much bigger surprise. The magazine stated that an arcade version of the game would be released in Japan the following spring, with a console release on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in the summer. Famitsu also revealed the game's story would take place 2 months after Persona 4 and the game's 5 modes: Arcade Mode, Story Mode, which would be exclusive to the home release, Score Attack Mode, Versus Mode, and Online Battle. While the game's website was launched on September 7th, fans would get their first look at the game during the Tokyo Game Show from September 15th through 18th. This kicked off a series of announcements as, throughout the rest of 2011, various characters would be revealed. At the end of the year, in December, the game would undergo its first location test. It would take place in 2 locations, Akihabara and Osaka, from December 2nd to December 4th. A second location test would be held shortly afterwards, from December 12th to December 25th. And a third would take place between January 13th and January 15th in 2012. On January 22nd, the Persona public relations team announced that the arcade version of P4U would be released in March. Persona fans hoping for a Western release would receive good news on February 21st, when it was announced that Persona 4, the Ultimate Mayunaka Arena, would be coming to North America that summer under the name Persona 4 Arena. As mentioned previously, it was also announced not only for the PlayStation 3, but the Xbox 360, which made it the first Persona game to appear on a Microsoft console. Over the next few months, more information about the game would slowly be revealed, including new characters, screenshots, videos, and more. Unfortunately for fans of the original game's English cast, a couple of voice actors had to be replaced due to various circumstances, but Atlus assured fans that casting decisions made in Persona 4 Arena didn't necessarily reflect what would happen in Persona 4 Golden. On April 17th, the Japanese home console release date was revealed to be August 2nd, 2012, with a summer North American release window. On May 25th, a day after the game's Japanese artwork was released, Zen United announced that they would be bringing Persona 4 Arena to Europe in 2012, although it would unfortunately be delayed until 2013. While anticipation was building, Atlus made another surprise announcement on May 30th. The Japanese release of the game would be moved forward by 1 week, now going on sale on June 26th instead of its original August 2nd release date. And on June 5th, Atlus finally announced the date for the North American release: August 7th, 2012. Excitement continued to build in July when Famitsu's reviews for both versions of the game were released, with both of them receiving 36 out of 40 possible points. While it was great for players that the game was being released on multiple platforms and in multiple regions, this did affect the game's development. Persona 4 Arena was the first game that the Persona team had released nearly simultaneously in Japanese and Western markets, and this caused some additional trouble. This may have explained some of the netcode issues that the game was having on the Xbox 360. However, some BlazBlue players noted that the Xbox 360 version of BlazBlue Continuum Shift Extend also had netcode issues at launch, but they were patched fairly quickly, so they may have just had less experience working with the hardware. Persona 4 Arena did follow a similar path to BlazBlue, as a patch for the 360 version was released shortly afterwards. All of the time and effort that the Persona and BlazBlue teams put in paid off. When the game was released in North America on August 7th, it received critical acclaim. The PS3 and Xbox 360 versions of the game received scores of 86 out of 100 and 83 out of 100, respectively, on the popular review aggregator Metacritic. The game was praised for its narrative, artwork, and gameplay, but some had issues with the way that its story was presented. Having to play through the story from multiple perspectives could be tiring for some players. The game's narrative also wasn't incredibly new player friendly, as it would spoil events in both Persona 3 and 4. The gameplay was also criticized for being too similar to other Arc System Works games. Some players may have also had issues with various characters, and the game's roster size as a whole, but there were both positives and negatives.
It's character stuff. Like, that is actually my favorite fighting game still to this day, the first Persona 4 Arena. The only thing, and even then there's stuff I don't like, and the main thing is just character stuff. Like, I despise Shadow Labrys as a character, playing against her especially. Chie is pretty annoying, and that's really it. So the class is pretty small, which is a good thing, I would say, overall for somebody who's like pretty serious about fighting games. It's bad for casuals though, because like they don't care, or not they don't care. I'm saying this wrong. Like they won't put that much time into one character probably, or if they do put that much time into one character, they're not going to dig that deep, type of thing. So they want to see a lot of characters and stuff. But for like learning a new game, a small cast is like kisses fingertips. Like I really like when new games have small casts, because I'm like, I can learn the game.
As mentioned earlier, the Xbox 360 version was experiencing network issues, which could explain its lower Metacritic score. However, even with all of its faults, Persona 4 Arena's reception was extremely positive. The game also sold well. It debuted at second on Japan's Media Create sales chart, with the PlayStation 3 version selling 128,485 units during its first week on store shelves. while the Xbox 360 version only sold 9,801 copies. The game had an overall sell-through rate of greater than 90%. Its PS3 sales numbers made it the fastest-selling fighting game on the platform, surpassing Tekken 6, which sold 103,000 units when it was first released in 2009. It also took home the Spike Video Game Award for the Best Fighting Game of the Year. It didn't take the game very long to appear at large fighting game tournaments, making an appearance at the 2012 Canada Cup on October 27, 2012. Just a couple months after its release in North America. It would also make its first and only appearance at EVO the following year, on July 12, 2013, with 400 players from around the world competing. Persona 4 Arena was a success and its story was over, or so we thought. Kazuhisa Wada, the game's chief designer, had always planned on doing more than just one game. So, from the very beginning, he planned to end the story of Persona 4 Arena at a place that felt conclusive, but also left room for things to be expanded upon. Once they started working on a sequel, their primary focus was balancing the game based on information they received from players. In an interview with Dengeki Online, Seiji Fukumoto, a director on Persona 4 Arena who would reprise his role in the sequel, said, "With the previous title, we collected plenty of feedback from players, such as character balance. With that as a base, we'll continue with the parts that made it fun, while adjusting the parts that weren't too well received." While they were starting off with a great foundation, they weren't just going to repackage the original game. There were several changes made to how things worked in Persona 4 Arena, and several things were added to make the sequel come into its own. You would be able to cancel previously uninterruptible animations. Overall damage was reduced, several characters' auto combos were reworked, along with various other gameplay and aesthetic changes.
So by the time Ultimax comes out, they have a pretty good idea of how Persona is played. Sometimes, like when Arc Sys makes new games, they have an idea of what they think is going to happen and they bounce around that for a while, and then after a while of watching people play and stuff, then they start adding stuff based on that. So Ultimax to me is their response to how people play Persona 4 Arena. So the major stuff they did is they made knockdown offense much weaker than before, like yeah, that's the way to put it. Because in the original one, I don't know if you played the game, but like there are a bunch of characters who have like knockdown, place their persona on you, 50-50 style offense, which, as we know, every fighting game right now is trying to take out that type of stuff as much as possible. It was really, really strong. It's one of the maybe most consistent things you'd see. So they took basically all of it away or made it really hard to do. That was a big thing. They made jumping stronger and they made anti-airs weaker. This is the first time I had experience dealing with that, but now it's like a pretty common thing in a bunch of fighting games like Street Fighter V. They complain about that. Dragon Ball Fighters, anti-airs are weak. Guilty Gear Strive, up until, we don't know about the next beta, but like every patch that we've played, people are like, anti-airs aren't good enough. They added a bunch of characters to Ultimax. They made auto combos have a little bit more use, I think. And they added some like extra ways to get meter and stuff that involves using auto combo, plus the shadow characters they added too, like more shadow characters. So they added a bunch of stuff to Ultimax.
While it was a sequel, and they wanted it to feel familiar, they didn't want it to feel too similar to the previous game. It's already been about 2 years from the previous title, and I believe that players will get bored of the exact same way of fighting. For this reason, we'd like to offer new ways to play, and the characters are seeing major changes. However, the character concept remains the same from the previous game. One of the major additions was the inclusion of shadow characters. For most of the characters in the game, there was an alternative version of them that you could play based on the shadows from the Persona series. These characters were designed with an offensive focus in mind, and are balanced by other limitations to their abilities. Because of these limitations, many players may find these shadow characters to be harder to play. Those who play a combo-heavy offensive style might actually have better movements using shadow characters. However, fundamentally speaking, I believe that normal mode characters are easier to use. You can fight with stability. Meanwhile, shadow characters can easily turn the table of the fight. Adding all of these new elements would obviously change how the game was balanced. The team's approach to character balance was to tweak things that were too strong, rather than just nerfing them. Persona 4 Arena is fundamentally adjusted through an upper balance. So rather than simply making stronger parts weaker, we adjust the cumbersome strong parts instead. In August of 2013, a sequel to Persona 4 Arena was discovered. The game was made available for testing in Akihabara and Osaka, and pictures posted by Famitsu revealed 2 new characters, Yukari Takiba and Junpei Iori from Persona 3. The next month, on September 26th, Atlus revealed that the game's title is Persona 4, the Ultimax Ultra Suplex Hold, or P4U2, and that the story picks up right where the original left off. While the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 releases were in the works, it will be coming to arcades in Japan during the winter season. That November, during a special broadcast from Atlus Japan, it was announced that Persona 4 Arena Ultimax would be coming to North America. That same month, on the 28th, the arcade version of the game was released in Japan. Amid new character and gameplay reveals, Persona 4 Arena Ultimax's Japanese release date was set for August 28, 2014, for the PlayStation 3. A new game mode titled Golden Arena Mode had also been revealed. Golden Arena Mode is a battle tournament incorporating RPG elements. Players will be able to raise their levels, learn over 150 skills, customize their favorite characters, and build social links with the Navigator character. Pre-orders for the North American releases, on both the PS3 and 360, went live in May with a summer release window. Then, a few months later, on September 30th, 2014, the game was released. It will come out in Europe shortly afterwards, on November 21st, 2014. The game was also received very well by critics, even though it didn't score as highly as the original game. Its 84 and 85 on Metacritic scores for the PS3 and 360 respectively are still impressive. The game received praise for being a worthy sequel, and expanding upon what Arena already did well. The game was also praised for how it handled its character balance, but not everyone was happy with some of the changes made to the original formula.
I think Ultimax is like too heavy-handed with the balance of like how the game's played. Like it feels like I can feel that ArcSys wants me to do certain things, not that I'm playing against somebody. So, I'm playing against like you're Narukami and you're doing this, so I need to do this. Like the way the game is built, it feels like the game is telling you have to do this, not you're playing against somebody and they're making you do that. It has this feeling of like you have to do this stuff that the dev is telling you to do. Not like a lot of the strategy in the game and like how you deal with people and characters and stuff is all like the dev says this has to work this way. I hate that the most in fighting games, I think.
The game also didn't sell as well as the original, selling 89,000 units during its first week on sale in Japan. However, that didn't stop Ultimax from taking over where Arena left off in the fighting game community, or FGC. It made its major tournament debut in North America at CEO on June 26, 2015, before making its EVO debut on July 17, 2015. With 437 entrants, it was the largest Persona 4 Arena tournament on record. Unfortunately, things have been quiet as far as Persona fighting games are concerned. While the competitive scene isn't dead, it's, understandably, nowhere near as popular as it used to be, with its side tournament at EVO 2019 having only 60 entrants. While fans have been asking for a sequel, especially since Persona 5 has already come out since Ultimax's release, there had been little to no news about a potential follow-up until recently. On April 30th, Atlus renewed the domain p5u.jp, even if there's no guarantee that another fighting game will be made in the Persona universe. The reaction to this glimmer of hope indicates that there are still plenty of fans out there, anxiously awaiting an official announcement. While most people have already moved on, I imagine that if a new game is announced, they'll be ready to jump back in.
I play Arena 1 every now and then. There are people who are like, oh, you can play Ultimax 2.0 on Parsec and stuff like that. I don't really like playing fighting games on PC. I'm not like a super big fan of Parsec and like all those like solutions really. So like, you know, in my head, I'm like, I really love this game. I played it a ton. I competed really hard. I did my best. I had some great stories and like, it was cool. Like, it's cool.